some writers, some people are like fractals. They do many different things, and from a distance they look like a chaotic pattern. But when you look deeper, there is some kind of harmony. Peter Lamborn Wilson is a writer. He has written many books, has performed all over the world, reading. Some of his writing is very poetic, but one of the main themes is a place in time can be something else than just a place in time. It could be an autonomous zone, temporary autonomous zones. Peter, that's a concept you have written about a long time ago now, 20 years, but what does that really mean?
First of all, I wanted to say something about your fractal remark. I used to call this state ambulatory schizophrenia. I don't try to put all this stuff together. If I'm interested in... at one point I realized I was interested in both Sufism and anarchism, and it didn't seem to me that this was really something you could synthesize, but I decided to heck with it. I'd just be interested. I'm interested in it. So in that way, for me anyway, these things began to come together just because I decided to be schizophrenic about it. So anyway, if that's fractal, okay. Now, on your other point, I still think that the temporary autonomous zone is a relevant idea because it happens. In other words, this is not something I invented. I always like to make that clear. I'm not like the father of the TAZ. I just noticed it. Maybe I gave a clever name or something that has now escaped from my grasp, and it's just, it appears in the world now as a phrase. But that's because I think the reason why it's a good idea is because it's not my idea. It's something that happens. And this thing that happens is that no matter how much oppression there is from the state or how much monoculture there is from corporate global capital, or no matter how much boredom, no matter how much slavery, I mean, at any period in history, somehow magical community happens. I don't know how else to call it. It's not just the ordinary community, the one that you're born in.
It's a community where the extra thing happens. Now, going to the deep roots of Christianity, I think Christ said, when two or more are together in my name, I'm there. Now, this extra thing that one of the writers you talked about, Fourier, called like harmony, that exists in a group of people within a religious context, which happens in Amsterdam we know the hacker groups, what happens in the krakers, the squatter movement, what happened in Ruigoord. Isn't that another name for extra happiness, extra...
Well, I was just trying to arrive at a social idea about that. I was trying to see something in common with all those different kinds of communities, and also seeing that this was a kind of a temporary thing because it depends on a special spirit, it depends on a very high state that everyone gets in together, and that's hard to sustain in human life. We don't have that many moments of exaltation and,
but still there seems to be some logic to it. I mean, if people come together for a good dinner party and the atmosphere is good and the food is good and maybe the music is good, that extra thing happens.
Absolutely, but then, then everybody goes home. The dinner party metaphor is an old one. It was used by the anarchists in the 19th century to say this was their idea of how a society could work all the time. Right, that nobody makes rules for the dinner party. You sit there, you say, well, I mean, maybe in a diplomatic dinner, but in a nice dinner party, and no one tells you what you're going to talk about, and each person could bring some food, so no one's sure what the whole dinner would be like. There's a lot of ways to introduce spontaneity within a situation where everybody's ready for it. A little wine, exalted state. And you have your temporary autonomous zone for the evening. So
you say autonomous. Could you also say isolated zone?
Well, isolation sometimes helps. Also, of course, historically, like the pirate utopias, you get far away from civilization, and it's perhaps easier for the spontaneity to occur. You can plan for spontaneity to emerge when you have some isolation. Now it's a question whether such isolation could be possible. I mean, certainly the pirate utopia idea is very hard to sustain. I'm just talking to these guys who are making the Y-lands, the floating islands on plastic rubbish. And I think that in the back of their minds, they have the idea of starting a new country or something based on these rafts. And I was saying, I don't think that's a good idea because the combination of corporate power and the nation state, they're going to blow you out of the water. They have all the big guns. They have satellites that can see exactly where you are all the time, blah, blah, blah. So that kind of idea of political independence is very dicey, very questionable now.
But are there places like...
In other words, you can't be isolated by your own fiat. I am now isolated. I'm a nation state. Someone's going to blow you out of the water.
So you either have to hide or you have to find a niche somewhere. Now, is cyberspace such a place where 10 years ago people thought this would be the new utopia, the new democracy, the new place where new ideas and even revolutionary ideas could flourish?
Well, I have to say, not even 20 years ago did I say that. I never said that. People accuse me of saying that, but they haven't read the book. What I said was that the temporary autonomous zone is a place, a physical place in time. And cyberspace is not a physical place. You have interactivity, but you have no communication, no community, because the body isn't there, the nose isn't there, the ears are usually not there. Usually only the eyes are there. And the eyesight is this supposedly the noble sight because it's detached from our bodies and it's the source of our knowledge of the world and so forth and so on. But the isolation of the sense of the one sense, I think, is potentially sickening. On the social, especially on the social level. And I also think that. What I said 20 years ago was that this cyber thing, which I don't even know if we used the word then, could be a way to potentiate the possibility of the emergence of the TAZ through communications. Right? I'm not sure that even this has been realized.
So the idea was there that you could use communication, email and so on, to bring people together on a specific subject and in a specific mood that could lead to this. I find it, when I hear you talking about the temporary autonomous zones, what comes to mind is 1 + 1 is 3. You see, two people, and then there's something extra, and that extra is what you have tried to find, to describe in ranging from dinner parties to pirates on the high seas.
Yeah, sure. I like to quote Michel Serres, the French philosopher who talks about Hermes, and he says that whenever there are two, then Hermes arrives. He's the third. He is communication. He is the secret. He is the guest, the parasite, the third. This mysterious force, and that's the magic, if you like, of the TAZ is this the uninvited guest.
Okay. At the same time, these TAZs that you've described, apart maybe from harmless dinner parties, have been groups or situations that were seen by society as threatening. Take the pirate empires in North Africa or in the high seas in the Caribbean. Take the communities that you describe in the 19th century. One of them was called the Phalanx by Fourier.
Sure. Well, those were intentional communities in modern terminology.
But they were always seen as dangerous to the present order, the political order.
Sure. If you're autonomous long enough, you get noticed, and then the trouble starts. And usually I find for these political or violent TAZs, the ones that achieve a large scale, the size of a city or even perhaps a region, these tend to last about 18 months to 2 years. I don't. All I can say is that seems to be an organic time length for these events. Rauchort is already 28 years old. That's very unusual. Most of the communes die before 2 years, historically. A few, some survive longer.
But talking about Ruigoord, I sometimes have the feeling that the fact that they were oppressed and threatened, and that the government wanted to build there, in fact made the community stronger, and that many communities thrive by an us and them feeling, that their harmony is in fact derived from the fact that they have a common enemy.
I suppose that could often be the case, but I don't think it's a sufficient case. I mean, it's not sufficient to make the case. That's very true of religious communes, for example, the us and them mentality, and those do tend to be the ones that last the longest historically. You got a very tight authoritarian religion with a charismatic leader usually, and an us and them mentality. You're very close to having what they call a cult nowadays. And in the 19th century, those people could get isolated, and a lot of them lasted a long time. There's a few German Anabaptist communities in America that are still going, even on their original utopian Protestant mystical basis. So, but that, it's not what I call a TAZ, because now an authority figure is there, an ideology is there, a kind of replication of order. These things don't go with the TAZ. So, at a certain point, those religious communes, I don't discuss them because they don't fit in my category.
Is that the point where they go from experiential, from being together and feeling that, to some kind of dogmatic situation where the rules are hierarchically imposed?
I suppose so. I mean, in the beginning, these kind of communities are usually the charisma of the leader and the bliss, or ecstasy or whatever that the people are experiencing. This makes it all voluntary. There's no coercion involved, you know what I mean? So, but then at a certain point, like let's say the leader dies and the next leader comes or is replaced by a committee of the elders. These are common scenarios. But by the way, I don't want to say that I don't believe in utopia. I don't believe in the permanent autonomous zone. Yeah, why not? I still say this is an interesting possibility. And I would also say that many temporary autonomous zones are put together by people who believe they're going to be permanent, and that's part of the energy that they needed to do it in the first place, right? So I certainly, from many points of view, philosophical, psychological, and science fictional, I don't want to do away with the idea of permanence. All I'm saying is that the temporary autonomous zone happens because human beings have a bodily and emotional and spiritual and intellectual need to come together sometime in their life to potentiate each other and make this little community or slightly bigger community happen in such a way as to get these extraordinary experiences, these deep emotions, the memories that will last forever. It's like a love affair, but it happens with maybe anywhere from 3 to 30,000 people. Yeah. So
But we all have those memories that one either a funeral or a marriage, springtime marriage where the whole family and all the friends were together, and there was this atmosphere that never came back, and we were all one for a short time.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, I hope everybody has at least one such experience. All I was trying to do was theorize and generalize about those experiences.
Okay. Now, for a person that has studied the plus in the 1 + 1 is 3 thing, you come across in our conversation a little bit as disillusioned with the present political system, with the world. You're looking for this bliss situation, and you write about it, but you don't see it in the world these days anymore?
Well, like I say, the TAZ happens, and I think it would happen no matter what, even if there was the whole world was a parking lot with, McDonald's every 400 feet. Somewhere in some little corner.
It must be in the master plan.
Yeah, behind some, garbage bin in the Universal Shopping Center, some kids will get together and, discover something different. And for a few hours or a few days or a few months or even a couple of years, and then that will be great for them. So that's going to happen because it's going to happen. But, the question for me now is, can this be something more than a spontaneous occurrence? Can it be more even than a tactic? Can it be part of a strategy that we could imagine and theorize that would be a global response to the global image of global capital. What we're looking for is a global resistance that's also based on the particular, on difference, on locality, on being in place. Mm-hmm. So that's a paradox, because I don't think a movement like that has existed before in history.
Doesn't it at times? I mean, maybe it's a bad example or a very good example is the .com market, where young kids came together, started new companies, and for the past 2 or 3, 4 years, they made a lot of money, and they had this feeling of, man, this is it, you know? Now the bubble is collapsed.
You're not going to get me to say that was a temporary autonomous zone. That was just like a parasitical growth on global capital, in my view. Or
but the people that were involved now say these were the heydays of our life. These was the period that we all.
I mean, lawyers, I suppose. I mean, everybody has, right? I don't care, though. I'm sorry, I just don't care.
But what we're looking for is what is the next temporary autonomous zone, or the next movement in the world where this plus feeling comes up again.
Well, every kind of social intoxication is not what I'm talking about. There's a social intoxication of tulipomania. Okay, this is not this is not my utopia. Right? I mean, yeah, sure. Maybe a psychologist will tell you there's a link between these two experiences, but I want to politicize one of them, or actually, I want to politicize both of them. I want to have a value. I want to make a value judgment between them. And I do, so sue me, But
from temporary autonomous zone to Sufism, let's briefly try to explain what Sufism is.
Okay, well, briefly, it's the esoteric movement within Islam, historically speaking. Usually organized into orders, although not always. Usually with a transmission from master to disciple, although not always. There are always exceptions to everything, especially in Sufism.
Could you call it the mystical side of Islam?
Yeah, as a general, sort of definition.
Okay. Now, these are groups of people that have a common belief system and a common goal, which could be described as coming close to God. Now, how does that relate to temporary autonomous zones?
Well, like I said, for me, since I'm a willing schizophrenic, I don't necessarily have to relate these things, but I'll try. In a sense, it's certain social aspects of Sufism that perhaps interested me in this particular context. In other words, whether belief in God or whatever, that's not a relevant factor here, because some TAZs believe in God and some are atheistic, and it doesn't seem to make a difference there. Atheists can have alpha experiences or whatever you want to call it also. So, but what interested me in the history of Sufism is certain social things that I noticed about tightly knit brotherhoods or siblings or whatever you want to call them. Sometimes women are involved. That once again you get a group turning itself on, and there's even a name for this, spiritual companionship, so that it's considered to be very difficult to do this alone. You have to have some special relationship with this theological principle, really, to hope to be able to do it alone. So the group becomes very important, and the group dynamic becomes very important. And then you have some Sufi orders or heretical groups, which interest me a great deal, where even the figure of the master is not present. The master comes in dreams, let's say. So there's no single human guru. Now that gets really interesting, because these groups seem to be self-organized, spontaneously self-formed groups to a certain extent. Then, of course, since it's the Orient, these groups get their own traditions and they try to perpetuate themselves, and sometimes they turn into their opposite in some way. But there's always that fascinating moment at some point in their development where on the social level, some kind of fabulous freedom occurs, right? So you have groups that within very rigid traditional societies find this magical door out of the oppression.
Yeah. But then oppression happens because the surrounding world, the ecclesiastic system by the church of the Islam then says we don't allow you to think for yourself and experience this freedom.
Okay, well, it's an important point here. Islam denies that it is a church in the Christian sense of the word. It doesn't have a pope, and in fact, it doesn't really have an absolute dogma. The Prophet said, anyone who greets you with salam alaikum, peace, anyone who greets you with peace, you must assume that they're a Muslim. You don't ask the question until they do something which offends against Islam. So what you privately believe is very important in Islam. And in fact, you can practice Islam in isolation. You are your own priest, right? All these mullahs, they do not have sacramental roles to play. They're simply intellectuals or learned people, ideally, who know more about the religion than you do. So you go to them for advice. So there's this sort of...
There's less of this ceremonial role.
Well, there's this so-called democratic aspect within Islam. Ceremony, actually, I suppose, yeah, sure, compared with, the ancient Chinese religion, there's much less ceremony in Islam also, although it's a religion, you got to have ritual. And it can be very ritualized. It can get very ritual heavy. But that's what Sufism wants to break through, always, there's always, they say there's no formality in Sufism. There's no good manners in Sufism, or either that or Sufism is good manners, so you make an identity between the two. There's no hypocrisy about manners. Everything should be clear and open. And at the same time, you're talking about a secret. But why is it a secret? Only because other people haven't understood it. And it's an open secret in that sense.
Through history, the Sufis have been accused of heresy, have been persecuted.
Okay, so right. In fact, there is no pope to say that these people are heretics. There is a consensus of the community, maybe. And generally speaking, historically, the consensus of the community has been that Sufism has at least a place within Islam. It's not considered to be heretical per se, except by modern extremists or Puritans or, rigid, hyper-Orthodox types. But they don't have any ultimate authority. If you want to go off and call yourself a Muslim and do Sufism, hey, that's your business. Now, yes, Sufism has been persecuted. Sufism is probably more persecuted now than it ever was, actually, because these Wahhabis, these fundamentalists, hate it. They really hate it, and they have...
Why do they hate it?
It rivals them for power. In other words, the fundamentalists are very authoritarian. They say our guys are the guys, who understand, who are right, who are correct. All these other interpretations of Sufism are wrong. Of Islam are wrong. We're the only right, true Muslims. Well, obviously Sufis can't believe this. They have to be tolerant on some level. That's just part of being a mystic in a way. So there's a conflict there, and
But this is the same conflict that happened in the church, in the Catholic Church, with some mystics. They were always said that since they follow their own internal guide rather than the Pope or the system, they were sometimes put on the stakes.
Right, but there's plenty of mystics also that remained inside the church who managed to reconcile themselves to dogma and were not burned at the stake, and they're accepted. Saint Catherine or John of the Cross, they're still inside the church.
Sometimes barely so.
Sometimes barely so, and sometimes there's slippage on both sides. Okay. You're thinking more of Giordano Bruno, or somebody like that who's an out heretic. Right, who rejected the church.
Meister Eckhart, of course, was also on the borderline.
On the borderline, right. His teachings are now, as far as I know, actually accepted within the Catholic dogma. Yeah.
Although they very much go to the same as what I see in Sufism, is that you yourself, there's some inner principle in you that goes above whatever the church or the world or the dogma says.
There's two ways of looking at this. Most Sufis would answer you that Sufism is an intensification of that inner essence of Islam. That what they're doing is at the center of Islam, not the periphery. That's our view, not their view, by and large. So you have to give credit to their view. You have to understand their view. Their view is that you can't really be a Muslim without being a Sufi. Now, then when we're looking at the situation from outside, maybe we don't see it that way, because historically Sufism has never been the power. It's never had the power. But even if you examine that idea, even that begins to fall apart, because I'll tell you why. The mullahs, the religious authorities, have often been against, let's say, the king. I mean, we saw that in Iran, even in the last century. So the king then adopts Sufism, or pretends to adopt Sufism in order to have a spiritual support for his own power system against the mullahs, against the clergy, so-called clergy. So at certain points, like I've just been reading Mughal dynasty history of India. All these emperors were Sufis. I don't know how sincere they were, but the last emperor was considered a Sufi master, and he initiated his own disciples in the Chishti order.
Why did you at any time become a Sufi yourself?
Well, all right. Sufis don't call themselves Sufis because Sufi actually means someone who's realized. And if you say you're realized, well, I have to distrust you. But yeah, I've been involved in Sufi orders.
What was the attraction?
To discover, to get to the bottom of it.
But you could have become a Mason, a Freemason, or join, I don't know, whatever secret esoteric order.
Yeah, that's true. There's an emotional attraction, I mean, if I believed in reincarnation, I guess I would have an easy answer to your question.
Why? Because then Sufism is a more...
No, I mean, maybe I could say, in another life I was, blah, blah. But I'm not going to say that either. It's just some kind of personal attraction.
Did you experience this feeling of brotherhood that then makes the link to the temporary autonomous zone? Did you experience that within your Sufi times?
Yes and no.
Yes, as it happens sometime, and no, as there were always some idiots there.
Well, yeah, maybe that. I guess, there's a story about, have we got a few minutes?
Yeah.
There's a story about a famous philosopher named Averroes and a famous Sufi named Ibn Arabi, who supposedly met at one time. They were passing on donkeys and they recognized each other in the desert or something. And Averroes says, "What do you think?" Meaning, what do you think of my philosophy? And Ibn Arabi says, "Yes." And Averroes is very happy, and then Ibn Arabi says, "No." Averroes is very sad. And then Ibn Arabi says, "Between yes and no, stars fall from heaven and heads fly off from their necks." So that's what I meant.
Try to explain that.
Oh, God damn. I thought I'd get away with that. Yeah, I experienced this brotherhood feeling, and I also noticed it in observing other, groups that I would be with. But ultimately, I found it for myself, not fully satisfying, because it's still, how can I put it? I don't want to appear as a critic of Sufism. I just want to say maybe that I needed something different, or.
But their rituals, their ceremonies, in as far as there are ceremonies, but I think it's called digger or zikr. Yeah. Would you say that is a bona fide way to experience the inner guide?
Often, I think so. I mean, let me put it this way. In the East, there's so many reasons to join a Sufi order, and they're not all about the zikr or the mystical brotherhood. Sometimes it's a very practical thing. If you don't have any great family connections, you're not very rich, you're not a very powerful person, you don't have any connections in the court, you need some kind of a sodality, some kind of a thing to belong to. Your family isn't enough. So the Sufi order is there to serve a function, rather like Freemasonry. has done historically, to be a mutual help, mutual aid society. So, for example, like the Freemasons used to, everyone would chip in a penny at every meeting, and if a member died poor, that would buy the coffins. It was a kind of death insurance. And then later that idea began to grow and became life insurance as well. So Sufism also serves a function a little bit like that. I remember once going to a bank in Tehran with a check from a Sufi master, and he sent one of his disciples with me. And I had to do some business with the publishing group I was working with. And we arrived at the bank, and it was like total chaos. There was zillions of people. Nobody was standing in line. Everyone was shouting and screaming and waving papers. And I thought, oh, God, I'm going to be here all day. Suddenly, this guy runs over and says, Ya Ali. And the disciple who's with me says, Ya Ali. And it's a disciple. Another disciple is in the bank. He says, what do you want? It's the master's business. This is the master's check. Come with me. Whoop, right into the back office. President of the bank, Ya Ali. Stands up, Ya Ali. It's the master's check. Cashes it in 2 seconds. We're out of the bank. And then I realized, wow, it's really useful to belong to a Sufi order. You don't have to stand in the bank all day. Yeah? You've got brothers everywhere.
Okay, but so that's similar to being a Freemason in the States. And now you belong to another brotherhood, a family of poets. Let's call this in general the psychedelic movement. Yeah. If you compare that to the Sufis.
Well, yeah, there's so many ways.
But to start with, most of the people who have taken psychedelics have some kind of understanding of the unitive experience of this spiritual connection.
Right. I actually think that in the case of the psychedelic movement, that a little more ritual is required. Yeah. So that's my critique of them. If I've made a critique of Sufism, and I apologize if it seems offensive, I would also then have to make a critique of the Western experience, which is too diffuse and flows out like water in the desert and sinks into the sand. If we had just a little more tightness, a little more organization, crystal form to it, and I think that there's a ritual movement emerging spontaneously now in the third psychedelic generation, which I find very interesting, and I'm sympathetic.
Are you referring to people who pick up from, say, the ayahuasca traditions, the Santo Daime traditions from the Brazilians?
I wasn't thinking of Santo Daime specifically because I have never experienced that, but it sounds like a church. I'm not sure that that's what every Westerner wants, is to go back into a church. But also the ayahuasca movement is much broader than that, and we have shamans coming up from South America and doing it right, showing people how to do it right. Minimum ritual, they're not asking you to convert to their religion, their tribal religion. They're just making sure you know what to eat, and you're not going to, that you're going to see spirits and how to talk to the spirits. There's a little basic instruction. But this gives so much shape to the psychedelic experience, to have a shaman there doing it with you, maybe brushing you with a feather when you're feeling bad or whatever it is. This is very good. This is very helpful, as long as it doesn't.
So you would say that
doesn't become a new dogma,
But the Greeks seemingly had a tradition of the Elysian mysteries that some scholars say was either based on mushrooms or some LSD type of ergot, and that they kept going for 800 years in a ritualistic way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and apparently fairly autonomous. The cult itself was fairly autonomous. Well, of course, in paganism, everything is fairly autonomous.
Well, there seem to have been two families who kind of controlled it for a long, long time.
Yeah. In my view, this is a branch of the great Indo-European Soma tradition, which you have, of course, most clearly in India, in the Rig Veda, and in Iran, where it's called Hom.
I think you have to explain what Soma is. Soma is a magical, mystical substance that we could relate to as a psychedelic drink.
Right. In the ancient texts, for many years it wasn't clear to modern scholars what they were talking about. There was all kinds of crazy ideas. But then Gordon Wasson said, it's mushrooms. And since then we've been unable to think. You can't discuss this question without taking psychedelics into consideration, even if you're going to disagree with it. My own view is that Soma could have been many things, many times in many places. I don't make any one single identification. But it's a principle. It's more like there's a principle involved, and that principle is a physical substance which transforms you through vision. So that could even be wine or meditation.
Tobacco, as the North American Indians.
Absolutely. Tobacco is the most widespread shamanistic drug in the world. It just so happens that it's been completely domesticated by us, and we've lost touch with whatever mystical functions it ever had, Well, not completely lost touch, but largely lost touch with those shamanic possibilities. Same with, coffee and tea and alcohol in our culture.
Do you feel that we're in Amsterdam here, that the use of hashish or marijuana or weed has gone the same way, that from originally being a way into another experience has now become like a daily domesticated drug?
Yeah, I see aspects of that, and I like to say that I'm against legalization. I mean, it's very nice to be here in Amsterdam where everything is loose and groovy, and it's a nice contrast with America where everything is paranoid and stupid. But on the other hand, I see that by repressive tolerance, you can actually render the experience I'm talking about fairly meaningless. By commercializing something, by domesticating something, you can actually take the initiatic, magical, dangerous, risky, spooky.
So by taking away the magical, the holy dimension, and making it a daily thing to smoke, to have a joint, you say you take away the potential for a spiritual deepening.
We lack what the anthropologists call rite of passage in our Western society. I mean, a lot of modern New Age type philosophers are commenting on this. It simply happens to be true. We don't have a formalized initiation in our society. So people, because initiation is a great human desire, people look to create their own or to participate in something that they perceive as an initiatic experience. And of course that always involves risk. The Sufis say you actually pay for that with your head. It's a very risky situation. And so young people especially, they're looking for a risky situation. And when they do this with psychedelics, there's a chance of a terrific payoff. You could see God, as we used to say in the 60s. And you run that risk. It's illegal. And that's one of the major reasons why it's risky. It's illegal. Yeah, it's forbidden. It's a forbidden mystery. All you have to do to destroy that is legalize the drugs. And pretty soon that form of initiation will no longer... It won't have the same appeal. It won't serve the same function.
Okay, but whose responsibility is it then to keep up some kind of rites of passage or initiation in our society? Is it the government that should still keep like the draft going and say, hey, I mean, for me, there was a period where I joined the army for not too long, but anyway, there was a period where I became from a boy a man. There was definitely a feeling, a group feeling, a little bit rough times, all the exercise shit.
No, it was, I think any anthropologist would say there was a strong rite of passage aspect to your experience, and that in the European peacetime armies, I think Switzerland is a good example too. That this could be very much an unconscious purpose still in the social acceptance of these institutions. But I don't particularly want to then say that the military draft is a good idea. I don't think it's anybody's responsibility to keep these initiatic experiences open. It's everybody's responsibility.
Would it have been the churches? Any churches?
It used to be, but how could it be now? There's no universal church. I mean, at the time when it's assumed that everybody's a Catholic, then the Catholic Church has all those possibilities within it. In a time when you could be anything or nothing, no one of these churches is going to be serving that function for society as a whole, obviously. So this is why something unorganized, something unexpected, something from another dimension almost, that is psychedelic drugs, psychedelic experience, it comes along and starts to admirably, or in many ways admirably, fulfill this function. And if we're going to have legal drugs, then I want the whole revolution at the same time. I don't want to see legal drugs in the present situation, because the next and only really last form of initiation is going to be violence, and you're seeing that in the American.
Is that I mean, take alcohol when you're 18 and you can have your first drink. Take computers. I remember my kids having their first go at computer games, and since my son became a computer game designer, I would say it was a heavy initiation for him.
I guess, yeah. I suppose so, yeah. You're saying that anything you like is an initiation, though?
Anything that changes your perspective in a dramatic way.
I suppose that must be so, yeah. So what could be more...
Didn't we experience internet, the coming at age of internet, say in 93, 94, when it happened, as some kind of initiation into cyberspace?
I don't know. I didn't. It never happened for me. If you tell me it happened for you, I'll accept that. However, I would also then say the same thing, or similar thing that I said about cyberspace as a TAZ, which I reject. I would also say that initiation is to put you in touch with the spiritual realm, and I'm not going to define that. I'm going to leave that as an empirical experience, that you know what I'm talking about, and they know what I'm talking about, and I know what I'm talking about. But if we try to talk about it, we'll ruin our understanding. So let's just say initiation is about getting in touch with the realm of the spirits, and that is not cyberspace. I know that William Gibson predicted that cyberspace would be haunted by gods.
Well, the religion of progress these days, with this what I call the telecommissars, the people that are in the telecommunication world and sing themselves as the new priests, there is a feeling of a religion and of a...
There's religion, bad religion and the internet were made for each other. Cyberspace is a perfect place for these priests. They love it. They're all on the net. Religion is thriving on the internet. New age religion, old religion, you name it. But that's, from my point of view, because they're lame, they're lost, they're out of touch. They think that they're in touch with something spiritual just because they can't feel their bodies. Their bodies are numb, so they think it's spirit. It's not. Again, I don't have this feeling. I don't open up on this level. Maybe
I sense a deeper Sufi feeling that whatever you do in the other realm has to be related to this realm, to the body, to the senses.
Absolutely. I mean,
it's not a disembodied religion. It's a...
Yeah, I don't know if that's Sufism or not. I mean, you find all sorts of different ideas in Sufism. This is my idea. I don't think there's any spiritual realm without the body realm, and I think that it's in fact impossible to make any kind of meaningful separation between them. So anything that starts towards a process of disembodiment for me is anti-spiritual. But hey, that's my perspective. There are some people who can only feel spiritual if they're escaping from their body, or think that they're escaping from their body, or that they're going to escape from their body in some future state. And in fact, I would say that's far more common in religion than what I'm saying.
But so what you're saying is that might be what in psychology sometimes is called a counterphobic. An attitude of say, well, I'm going to jump out of planes, or these days you do bungee jumping, and kind of go against the fear of the body, deliberately trying to get a peak experience out of it. We have theme parks. I mean, I think the whole Disneyland rides are based on the fact that there's some rush coming up, and that you think that you getting close to that other realm by just stepping out of your body.
There's always one problem for me, and that is when capital is mediating this experience, I distrust it at the deepest possible level. So as soon as I see that this is a product I'm being offered, or that there's some product I have to buy in order to do it, who was it said, always distrust any situation that requires you to buy new clothes? Usually it means you're getting a job, or you're getting married, or something you should be very, very careful about, And so anytime I hear that there's a product involved, tick, 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 my mind begins to work, and I'm saying, watch out. This is capital tricking you again, trying to create false desires in order to, sell you stuff. And that stuff, of course, is everything. Capital, the world of capital is so desperate now that the attempt is to sell you your authentic life. I'm going to sell you your own authentic life. You buy this car, I promise you a peak experience. An authentic, ecstatic experience. You buy this soft drink, it's like better than being high. You can see by the insane smiles on the faces of the models. Nothing makes you that happy, except maybe drugs. That's why drugs are so popular.
But isn't that where religion and capitalism come together? That it sells you experiences, preferably peak experience, preferably the best experience.
As soon as that happens, Martin Luther comes and nails the shit to the wall. Then someone is going to come and say that's not my religion. That always happens, every time a religion gets top heavy with money and organization and so forth, bam, the people from underneath start getting out and starting a new show. And sometimes that gets exceedingly violent, like in 1640 in England, or 1525 in Germany.
When the Reformation happened.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I was thinking of the peasant revolt, the Anabaptist uprisings. That Luther then crushed,
Would you say that we're close to a similar kind of uprising against this capitalist system, which now sometimes is called here the kleptocratic system, where people, they're only for their own pockets?
I've also heard biopirates, the people who are doing genetic manipulation. I don't like this term. These are not pirates. Pirates were against the system. These people are the system. Let's not dignify them by calling them pirates or thieves. It's far worse than that. Now, what was the question again? Do I think that there's an uprising coming? God, I wish I could say yes, I told the people in Rotterdam last night, I live in hope. I haven't given up being hopeful. I can't be optimistic, but I still cling to my anti-pessimism. I would like to see the dialectic get started again. I'd like to think this is not the end of history.
Okay. Let's get some movement in society and in the universe. Okay. Peter, a last word.
Revolutionary hope.
Thank you.